The movie The Exorcist was based on a true story from 1949. A boy was diagnosed as being possessed by the devil, and the Roman Catholic Church believed this enough to assign multiple exorcists to this case. A supposed total of 26 people have been said to have witnessed the horrible things that happened during these exorcisms, and it was apparently so terrifying to those who were involved that books were written about it and movies were made about it. The Exorcist is considered today as one of the scariest movies ever made, and so many stories borrow and steal directly from this story that it is hard to see where one begins and another ends. Also, in my experience from the research I have been conducting over the past year or so, the events which unfurl in the story below seem to coincide with what quite a few books also confirm. There is a book written by a Father Malachi Martin called Hostage to the Devil. This is not a questions and answers book or a procedural book. This book tells you 5 stories in extreme detail about 5 individual cases of possession. These stories, in some part or another, bear a resemblance to the story told of R. So, with that being said, this is the true story behind The Exorcist. The first time I prayed for a truly possessed person, I put the crucifix on that person's head, and they slithered right out of their seat like a snake. Reverend Thomas J. Utener, Roman Catholic exorcist. The setting is 1949, in Cottage City, Maryland. It involved a 13-year-old boy called R. His identity had been kept a secret for many decades. It was not, in fact, a female, as the movie suggests. To this day, the boy has never spoken publicly about what he went through. For a little bit of background, neighbours and friends such as a Dr. Kevin Kagay, who lived in this area and went to the same school as this boy, described him as quiet, unpopular, not very athletic, but he was very studious. He was also slightly withdrawn. To the outside world, his family was very pleased to be a part of the working class. All in all, Dr. Kagay claims the family was a plain, old, normal family when all was said and done. Nothing to speak of in regards to nuances or peculiarities. But in the summer of 1948, their lives would be forever changed, because it was this summer that the boy's aunt decided to teach them how to play with a Ouija board. This in itself does not seem to be as if anything could happen, but after a few weeks of constantly toying around with this Ouija board, the aunt who had taught the boy unexpectedly died due to what could only be classified as natural causes. Keep in mind, this being 1949, that phrase could encompass a very wide array of things. A person could be walking down the street and get hit with a bus, and the coroner would claim death by natural causes because, naturally, when you get hit by a bus, you're going to die. Times that far back had a different sense of logic then than they do now. So what this boy's aunt actually died of may only be revealed through your imagination. Not many people mention how bad messing with a Ouija board is, but from personal experience, I have seen with my own 2 eyes that sometimes the things you call to talk to you are not friendly. And when you invite them to come to talk to you, they definitely view your invitation to them as just that, an invitation. Shortly afterwards, this boy and even his family started to notice strange occurrences. Unusual sounds such as unexplained thumping, tapping, and banging, coming from an otherwise empty upstairs, or objects moving on their own such as a chandelier swinging, or portraits of Jesus Christ banging against a wall as if moved by some invisible force. Additional sounds heard included a frantic scratching and or knocking from under the floorboards, but in their denial, the family blamed this on rodents and attempted to call in pest control, who, in turn, discovered absolutely nothing. As time went on, the family began to believe that maybe these strange events were happening because the aunt was attempting to communicate with them from the afterlife. As nights went by, the intensity of these noises only grew and grew. The house echoed with the noises of what could be described as a large group of people marching, like a soldier's cadence of sorts. And even after that, events took a shocking and powerful turn. The mother walked in once to find the entire bed with her son in it, shaking and rattling violently. This changed the entire game. Suddenly, it was not a fun or cute little communication with the afterlife, and the family began to have doubts that this was from the aunt at all. This was not the only thing that was recorded either. Additional pieces of furniture around the house began to move of its own free will as well, such as dressers, night tables, coffee tables, etc. As mentioned above, Dr. Gagay had another story that will make your brain freeze for a second as well. While the doctor's father in 1949 was in this boy's house, he vividly recalls an instance where the boy was sitting in a chair and then quickly, without any warning whatsoever, he was thrown completely out of his chair and landed multiple feet away. This was the first time that someone outside the family had witnessed an event such as this and began to suspect that something abnormal was going on here. Now, another thing to take into consideration is that back in 1949, you would slit your own throat before you let your personal, negative information get around town. People absolutely hated rumours, especially about themselves. So in this time period, people would do everything they could to keep events such as this hush-hush so they wouldn't be viewed as town lunatics. It was also said that once night fell, the boy's behaviour became dramatically, intensely, and increasingly disturbing. Marks, bruises, scratches, and welts began appearing on the boy's body without any indication that something had been done to physically react the way his body was. To this day, these markings have, and probably will never be explained. As most people will do, the family of the boy began to exhaust their options. They obviously went to doctors, and then the county psychiatric evaluation professionals as well. More or less, they were trying to rule out certain aspects of the vast array of things that could potentially be wrong with R. Surprisingly enough, shrinks found nothing, so they contacted the Catholic Church as a last resort. There, they were put in contact with a Father Albert Hughes. Father Hughes died in 1980, but a close friend of his and a confidant as well, Father Bober, has spoken about the events which took place. Father Hughes first met the afflicted boy in February of 1949, and Father Bober explains that Hughes mentioned to him that upon the moment of meeting the boy, he noticed a very dark stare, almost as if there was nothing behind the eyes. He also noticed that immediately the boy seemed to be staring hard at the books Father Hughes had placed across the table, one of which being the Bible. This is a classic symptom of possession, as the person afflicted with this seems to have a deep-seated aversion or hatred of all things sacred, including the books of Scripture, crucifixes, clergy members, idols, icons, medals, and so on. During this event in which the boy stared at the books, Father Hughes's chair, with him still inside it, quite literally lifted up and levitated, forcing him backwards against a wall. It was this exact instance that Hughes knew he was dealing with something preternatural and diabolical, and, from this point on, he addressed the situation as properly as he could. Immediately, Father Hughes asked the boy in Latin, "What is your name?" The boy's response is classic. He clearly stated, "I am Legions." As previously mentioned in this website's dissection of the movie The Rite, and cited various quotes from Chief Vatican Exorcist Father Gabriel Amroth and Exorcist Father Antonio Fortea, it is beneficial to speak to someone who may be possessed in a language that they could not possibly know, such as Latin or Greek. This way, the actual person is unaware of what the priest is saying. That way, when the priest addresses or questions the person or demon, if they respond to those questions, then it is a safe bet that the person has a diabolical presence sharing the vessel. The reason "I am Legions" is such an intimidating response is because it immediately indicates that there are multiple demonic entities within the same vessel, which means that the priest will have to fight so much harder to absolve the afflicted person. Imagine it like this. You are the priest. You are walking down a dark alley. you see someone, a demon, in front of you, and you prepare yourself for a conflict. But then you turn and see 5 more demons behind you. That is exactly what it is like in the situation described above. It is perceived at first as an unfair fight, and that is extremely intimidating. While the belief of demonic possession is a shared one that spans many religions and cultures, it is most closely tied to Christianity, and more closely with the Roman Catholics. The actual rite of exorcism is an ancient one. It dates back to officially being formally written in the 16th century, but exorcisms have been performed for thousands of years, most notably by Christ himself. Almost all of the prayers involved are in Latin, though the more I seem to unearth about the topic, the more it seems that successful exorcists follow the formula, but slightly modify it in minuscule and often unnoticeable ways. At the time that Father Hughes had met this boy, he was not extremely familiar with the rite of exorcism. As a matter of fact, this 13-year-old boy would be the first exorcism that Father Hughes would ever perform. The boy was admitted to a hospital in Washington, D.C., run by Jesuit brothers, monks, who oversaw the events. The boy was already in a violent and volatile state by this point, shaking and rocking, spitting, screaming, and having aggressive outbursts. At some point, the nurses at the hospital made the choice to physically restrain him, to try to get him under some type of control. By now, Father Hughes had been reciting the exorcism prayers for 3 consecutive nights, to no results. In fact, the boy became increasingly violent. He would foam at the mouth, shout, insult the priest, and attempt to break his constraints. Eventually, R succeeded in getting one of his hands free, and with that free hand he reached under the bed, physically ripped off one of the springs under the mattress, and sliced Father Hughes with the spring. The gash went from inside of Hughes's wrist all the way up to the nook of the elbow when it bent. To an untrained eye, it looked as if it could have been an attempted suicide, but there were witnesses who could document this account of attack. Hughes was forced to take time away from the event to heal. He felt as if he had failed the boy, and the boy eventually returned home. The family remained in a constant state of fear for their son. He continued to exhibit unexplained cuts, bruises, scratches, and welts. This had become common, but one night, the boy's mother thought she saw something astounding. The words St. Louis appeared to be literally branded into the boy's chest. After that night, the family moved in with relatives who lived within the city. They gave the excuse that they had moved to St. Louis to obtain medical treatment for their son. This would be the exact opposite of good, because at this point, the move was the worst thing that they did. With the doctors coming up with 0, the family yet again turned to the church, this time meeting a Father William Bowden, a senior priest from St. Louis Diocese. He was a very street-smart priest who had spent time in the U.S. Army and was known for being observant and not easily swayed. Upon meeting with the boy and family, Father Bowden had decided that he believed the boy was possessed, but decided to approach the situation with caution because he already knew of the outcome of the previous exorcism, in which Father Hughes had become seriously injured. He believed that he was going to be the person who would finish the fight that Father Hughes had started. Shockingly, every single detail of the exorcisms performed over the next 6 weeks were kept in a detailed diary by the priests. After these events had concluded, an author named Thomas B. Allen published these diaries in their entirety. The book is titled Possessed: The True Story of an Exorcism by Thomas B. Allen. At this point, Father Bowden was having serious doubts about his own ability as well. He was unsure if he could complete the ritual successfully, but in the end, all he wanted to do was help a child fight off the demons who were taking up residence in his body, quite literally ruining every aspect of life from the inside out. During these exorcisms, Father Bowden decided to enlist the help of several priests and a young seminarian, whose only function would be to help everyone hold down R once things intensified during the ritual. Almost from the start, this child began to forcefully spit at the priests, threatening them with violence commanding them to leave and making vulgar sexual propositions towards the clergy present. But, not to be deterred, Father Bowden and his priest recited the exorcism prayers every night straight for a full 3 weeks. Pinning the boy down frequently due to his violent outbursts was not uncommon, and actually became a regular occurrence, in fact. One of the priests recorded in the diary that the blows this boy was physically delivering were far beyond the strength of an ordinary boy at his age. He was seriously injuring large grown men. As an act of desperation, at times the priest even held a pillow over the boy's face to stop him from swearing. The marks continued to appear, sometimes forming words, sometimes not. There were more frequently appearing periods of lucidity. But then, when the boy would become calm and cool, but still calculating. While they were becoming more frequent, they would never last. At this point, the priests all agreed that in order to give the family some peace, they would move the boy again, this time to a hospital run by an ancient order of Catholic monks. This was more of an exile. The boy was confined to a room and where no one can hear him during these outbursts, and where everyone could work as intensely as they needed to without raising the concerns of outsiders. It was in fact the same type of room that a mental patient of the time would be assigned to. The windows did not open, and you could not open the door from the inside. Everything in there was regarded as safe, or otherwise unable to assist the afflicted in harming themselves, and so on and so forth. At this point, people were beginning to become concerned with the health of Father Bowden. It must be noted that priests are also responsible for their daily assignments while taking part in special assignments. So while Bowden was conducting these exorcisms, oftentimes in the early morning, he was spending most of the time at his day job, where he ran a parish. He had been losing massive amounts of sleep. He was feeling exhausted both physically and mentally, and at one point, he even broke out in boils. This was not turning out how he had hoped, but he still kept at it and continued to put up a good fight with everything he had in him. There was one night in particular that brings some things into question. A priest had his nose broken by the boy during one of his outbursts. This was a period when the priests were going through a growing sense of doubt and despair, feeling as if they were not able to make a dent in the boy's salvation. They decided that the best course of action would be to baptize the boy in an effort to strengthen his resistance through the sacraments. The belief was that once they anointed this boy as a converted Catholic, he would be subject more so to the spiritual power of the Catholic Church and its priests, thus assisting the priests with progress towards liberation. When they attempted to force the boy to take communion by accepting the communion wafer, it was said that this was one of the fiercest bouts of resistance the boy had ever put up, and he fought tooth and nail against it. Finally, the boy did wind up accepting the communion wafer, but the results were not as expected. This only increased the resolve of the demons within. But then, days later, in an event that shocked all those who were present, in the middle of one of the worst displays of violence and hatred the priest has ever seen, for the first time in many days, spoke in a clear voice and declared, "Satan, Satan, I am St. Michael, and I command you, Satan, and the other evil spirits to leave the body now." Now, to go into further detail about why this is significant, according to the Catholic belief, St. Michael is the chief archangel in heaven. He is the angel whom God gave power over Satan, and he is also the angel who threw Lucifer from heaven and exiled him. He is literally one major badass, but for the side of good. As a matter of fact, in every book I have read on exorcism, the priests all mention that they pray for intervention from St. Michael himself, because it is quick, decisive, and absolute. Assistance from St. Michael is like walking into that alley I described above, finding out you're against 6 assailants, and then literally unleashing an entire army against those 6 assailants. Demonic entities don't stand a chance against this archangel. The Roman Catholic prayer of St. Michael is the prayer that you are supposed to recite for protection over any type of evil that you may feel building or brewing. For you believers out there, if you have ever experienced a malevolent presence such as a poltergeist, or just a spirit or entity which you feel intends to harm you, this is the prayer you are supposed to say, as it alerts the archangel to your situation. After what was believed to be the intervention of St. Michael, R attended Mass finally, and for the first time, he seemed at ease. Only a few days after the family returned home to Cottage City and quietly slipped back into the way things used to be, entering their old routines, taking part in their old life, and moving on. The parents were a bit more reserved now than they had been before, and things got back on track for the family. The boy went back to school and never exhibited any strange behavior such as what was previously seen again. He eventually went on to work for NASA, and even now, the boy chose and requested the priests and authors to keep his identity a secret. As of the current time, he claims that he does not have any recollection of these events, and this is also common amongst possession victims. This usually means that whatever had control of them was stronger than the average diabolical entity, as only the stronger demons seem to rob the afflicted of the memories which occurred while the vessel was occupied by the diabolical entity. This is the story of the true ordeal behind The Exorcist. The movie was responsible for spawning an intense debate of religion versus science. It was nominated for 10 Academy Awards and was a blockbuster hit. While many of the scenes in the movie The Exorcist were exaggerated, within the small world of actual exorcists, they all claim that the movie is strikingly accurate. Exaggerations aside, the content and many actions of Regan in the movie are claimed to be rather identical to some of the things real-life exorcists have seen, minus the buckets of shooting pea soup and full 360-degree head-turning. I want to be clear on one thing. This entire article is nothing more than a basic summary of the events that conspired. I would recommend for everyone interested in the topic to read the book I mentioned above, Possessed. It will give you all the information you could want about the details in this case. The record's kept and meticulous. The detail is something that will blow your mind. But ultimately, the choice about whether or not you believe is completely up to you. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please go ahead and hit the like button. If you enjoyed my narration and are interested in hearing paranormal stories, some true, some fiction, please subscribe to my channel.